In vanilla WoW, raiding was still pretty new and Blizzard was still getting used to the whole balancing thing. So most of these hard raid bosses will be from early WoW. Around the end of BC, Blizzard finally started to get things figured out and stopped making it impossible to kill bosses. Kinda. Number 10 on this list will be the easiest at Heroic Spine to Deathwake. Spine was the second to last boss in Dragon Soul.
I think this should have been
one
higher.
of the few times where the second to last boss is harder than the actual final boss.
This should have been higher.
If you could down Spine,
100%.
Madness was a cakewalk in comparison. But why was Spine so hard? Well, because it was the first time in years that top guilds needed a class stack in order to down a boss.
That's true.
A practice used quite a few times in other Dragon Soul bosses, but before that was almost a thing of the past. There was a joke for some time, before they nerfed the fight, that unless you were mage, or rogue, or shaman, you would instantly die to a selection debuff for playing the wrong class. The fight itself was pretty simple.
Yeah,
it only had
true.
3 phases, and you just needed DPS down the tendon to pop the plate. Once all 3 plates fell off, the fight was over. The plates, however, were only available to DPS for like 20 seconds, so you needed high burst to kill it in 2 lifts, or else the healing debuff going out in addition to the bloods would wipe the group. The Shaman Spirit Wing Totem did a nice job of getting rid of all the healing debuffs, so the more shamans you had, the better. Number 9 on this list is Valistraz the Corrupt, or more commonly known as Valistraz the Guildbreaker.
What?
Being the second boss in a raid where the first boss was already incredibly difficult, didn't help much. Got past the 9 possible kiting challenge?
Spine was harder.
Here's an encounter where almost none of the rules you've had to play by elsewhere in the game really apply.
Okay.
Also, the first raid encounter in the game to introduce a guaranteed death debuff, and only the second where a player became an actual bomb. The fight would randomly give players a burning adrenaline debuff that would give you unlimited resources and let you attack really fast. And would kill you when it ended. When it was your time to die, you would just have to run to your little corner and die in your designated place, so as not to kill other raid members. Since you were attacking a lot faster than normal, threat management was a huge issue for this fight that required 4 to 5 tanks for its breadth. And if any of you have raided long enough, I'm sure you know a person or two who just can't handle a threat no matter how many times you yelled your warriors to hold off. It wasn't uncommon to have guilds spend months on this fight before downing it, or disbanding, because it was actually required personal responsibility to not kill other raid members and watch your threat. Which sounds like it's something easy to do, but it's really not. Number 8 on this list is Heroic Firelands Rag. Firelands Ragnaros was just a straight up legitimately hard fight, and a long one to boot, with 4 main phases and 2 transition phases, pushing it out at around 15 minutes long. The first guild to down this boss did so after only 500 attempts. Now the thing about Rag is that the 7 bosses before him were nowhere near as difficult. Well, maybe back to like a spider, but it was pretty common for guilds just to go 7 of 8 and call it a day. Why was Rag so hard? Well, because there were a lot of ways a single...
What?
The first guild to down this boss did so after only 500 attempts. Now, the thing about Rag is that the 7 bosses before him were nowhere near as difficult.
One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
So what? He made a fucking mistake. What, are you gonna crucify him for it?
No, but like, Bethlac was
just
fucking easy compared to Heroic Rag.
Oh
it was like having 3 difficulty. It was
so
normal,
dumb.
Heroic, and then Mythic fucking Ragnaros. It was a completely different thing.
Listen, just because the list doesn't make you happy, doesn't mean you have to crucify
Heroic Rag was it was at a 20-minute enrage timer.
I'm not even talking about that. Who cares? God, just watch a video. Shut up.
Well, maybe back to like a spider, but it was pretty common for guilds just to go 7 of 8 and call it a day.
Nobody did
Why was Rag so hard? Well, because there were a lot of ways a single player's mistake could wipe the entire raid.
That is true.
Accidentally step on a fire trap? Wipe. Mess up a meteor? Wipe.
True.
Not quite enough DPS on your fire elemental? Wipe.
True.
Miss your knockback on the seeds? Wipe. The transition phases, where if one elemental reached the hammer, your group would wipe, were completely random on Heroic.
Yep.
So, if you had bad luck with the elemental spawns and all 10 spawned next to the hammer, you were screwed.
That's a really good
Also,
Ragnarok.
during Phase 4, 10 minutes into the fight, if you had bad placement on frost patches, or if the root spawned under Rag, you were screwed. Before his nerf, only 25 guilds managed to take him down. Number 7 on this list is Firefighter 25, pre-nerf. Now, I'm going to try and avoid putting fights on here that were impossible to kill before their nerfs, like Lady Vash or Kale, but Firefighter isn't one of those. He was just ridiculously hard. Now, in Old War,
You could do a fight in a certain way to make the fight harder than normal. This was the last way to do that before they just added heroic mode in TOC. So, just think of Firefighter as heroic mode Mimiron. To activate heroic mode, just push the big red shiny do not push button prior to the fight to activate the self-destruct mechanism. This gives the raid 8 minutes to kill Mimiron before the raid is wiped. Also, gives all of Mimiron's vehicles the emergency mode buff, increasing their health and damage by 30%. Mimiron in hard mode was ridiculously hard, required raid stacking and extraordinary coordination, well above beyond the standard set by the rest of the hard modes in the dungeon. The new addition to the fight, fire being sent out to random players and moved to the nearest player, was a constant threat. The fire did enough damage to kill you quite quickly, so obviously you didn't want to stand in it. Mimiron would send out bots to put out the fire sometimes, but these bots had an aura that silenced anyone near them. So, you had to kill them quickly or kite them away from the healers.
This is a good fight.
Plus an additional assortment of abilities that did a ton of damage, like Plasma Beam that could kill tanks through cooldowns. Overall, everything in the fight did a lot of damage and required some super raid awareness on top of a really tight enrage timer. Number 6 on this list is Heroic Lich King. Heroic LK was non-beaten until he was nerfed. Although the reason for this, in addition to him being a hard fight, are the limited raid attempts and the stacking buff coming out pretty early. In ICC, Blizzard tried out a new system of limited raid lockouts for heroic modes. Normally, guilds would just wipe hundreds of times on bosses to learn their mechanics and down them. But with only having 50 tries a week on heroic bosses, made that strategy not all that viable. So instead, guilds would send their alts in to learn all the mechanics inside and out before sending their maids in for the real attempts. Now, why was the fight so hard? Well, there were a lot of one-shot mechanics, in addition to high raid and tank damage. You could not do this fight without a Disc Priest to spam bubbles on the raid, or a Holy Pally to spam heal the tanks. There was one guild that was able to down LK before the 5% buff went out, the raid-wide buff that gave you more health, damage, and healing, but they got their kill taken away from them for exploiting the fight. You see, during one phase of the fight, Valks will come down and pick up a random raid member and carry them to the cliff to drop them off. To stop the Valk, all you need to do is kill it before it reaches the edge, while stunning and slowing it as much as possible. Some classes could ignore this mechanic, like Hunters, who were good enough to disengage back onto the platform after being dropped, or Warlocks with their portals. During the transition phase, the Lich King would spawn an extra ring around the platform while he uses Remorseless Winter, that you would need to stand on while killing ants. When the phase ends, the platform drops away and you need to run back on the main platform, or else you'll fall to your death. And that's where the exploit comes in. You see, there was a bug that allowed Serenite bombs to regrow the platform from the transition phase during his other phases.
That wasn't heroic.
So, when the Valks came down to drop off raid members, it would just drop them on the regrown platform, nice and safely, allowing you to ignore the mechanic of the fight completely. When confronted about using the exploit, the guild said they thought it was part of the fight and didn't know it was an exploit. Baragon was able to down the fight later with the 5% buff right before the 10% buff went out. Number 5 on this list is Kill Jaden from Sunwell. Like most end bosses, he has a lot of instant kill abilities on top of a long 5-phase fight. Kill Jaden required tight raid execution on a larger scale along with super tight DPS check meant you could never slack, or you would eat darkness without a dragon up. The timing of Fire Bloom, an ability that turned you into a walking flame AoE and damaged everyone within 10 yards, and Flame Darts, which hit everyone in the raid every 3 seconds, could line up so that it went out right before darkness, another ability that would just hit everyone in the raid for a mass amount of damage. Think Crackle. Blizzard actually tried to fix this via hotfix because it was pretty unreasonable RNG, but the fix didn't work. There was also an ability called Sinister Reflections that made evil clones of random raid members, and if the Sinister Reflection went on a druid, you had to prepare yourself for mass raid damage from Moonfires on top of all the other damage going out of the fight. All in all, a pretty hectic fight that few raids ever downed. Number 4 on this list are the 4 Horsemen from 40-man Nax in Vanilla. Now, a lot of bosses in 40-man Nax are pretty hard, but 4 Horsemen did something that no other raid boss has done.
Why do you make that face every fucking time he lists a boss?
And each one needed to be hit capped so the taunts wouldn't miss, which was only possible with a specific 4-set bonus. It stands to this day as the most amount of time a single encounter laid undefeated while also not requiring any retuning or bug fixing. That's approximately 7 weeks. The fight required a tank swap when the mark stacks got too high, but the mark had a 50-yard range, so rotating timing was key. A simple tank swap with 8 separate tanks was no easy thing to get together for your average 40-man raid guild, considering they needed a 4-set bonus. This led many top raid guilds to taking tanks from other guilds just to down this fight. Once you had the 8 tanks and tanking rotation down, the fight itself wasn't all that difficult, but that was easier said than done.
All you
Number
need
3
is
on
8
this list
tanks with
is
tier
Yogg
3.
Saron,
That's all.
Zero Light and Old War.
Okay, that's
Yogg
true.
Zero,
Yep.
or Alone in the Dark, is the hard mode version to Yogg Saron, similar to Firefighter
This is a good
from
choice.
Numeron. For Yogg hard mode, all you had to do was not have any of the 4 keepers help you during the fight. Alone in the Dark was considered mathematically impossible to down before the Chinese guild Stars got a legit kill. There was a kill before Stars got theirs by Exodus, but they exploited the fight by evading the Guardians in the last phase, and having a healer gain aggro on them while inside the brain room, turning the hardest point of the fight into an easy
I
tank
watched
and
this
spank.
video about it.
For the legit kill, it required a lot of
Healing
hunter
with
and tank
righteous
hiding,
defense outside the
warlocks
room.
facing away from the boss using
Yeah.
Drain Soul, and
That's
rogues
abnormal,
interrupting
though.
tentacles with Phantom Knives. Number 2 on this list is
fucking
Cthulhu,
ridiculous.
the other old god.
Wait,
Like Yogg Zero, Cthulhu was considered mathematically impossible to kill, but was never actually down before it was fixed. A few people posted the math of a full 40-man raid, properly geared, doing 100% optimal DPS, optimal strat, everything perfectly, and it still would have been impossible. There was also a bug where sometimes the
Number 1,
tentacles would
KJ?
cause the entire encounter to evade or reset. But even when that didn't happen, the fight was still entirely impossible for the BIS gear that was available at the time.
Wow.
Now, I know I said I wouldn't post any of the impossible kill fights on here, but Cthulhu is an exception, as he was the first. And if you ask people who the hardest boss ever in WoW was, many people will say Cthulhu, or the number 1 on this list. Number 1 on this list is the hardest raid boss ever that wasn't impossible to kill, and that is a little known boss called Meru. Or Immeru, I don't know how to say his name. The 5th boss of Sunwell. It's one of the biggest execution fights in WoW. You have, in order of increasing difficulty, skulls that must be mass dispelled on a regular timer, groups of adds on a timer that come from both sides of the room, small void walkers that must be AoE down, which spawn from void sentinels, void sentinels which hit incredibly hard. Their health was such that, if your DPS was appropriate, you'd have about 5 seconds before the next sentinel spawned. So, basically, you put a lot of your DPS on the ads, but you also had to DPS the boss.
Thank you, man.
Phase 1 lasted forever, and it was a really, really easy thing to get behind on something. If you got behind, it was over. Phase 2 was the biggest DPS check in the game. He had an aura that would do ever-increasing amounts of damage, eventually one-shotting you. There were tons of reports of guilds wiping to him at 5% health night after night. Meru was just an insane DPS HPS check that required executing the same strategy in Phase 1 for 6 minutes while slowly whittling him down, then getting a perfect transition, seconds too early or too late would wipe you, and then being able to stay alive for 90 seconds while you killed Entropus. And Meru was 100% execution from start to finish, with the most RNG coming from stuff like Dispel Resist and AoE Threat Resist on ads from Warriors or Paladins. And that's it for the top 10 hardest raid bosses in WoW. Honorable mentions go out to Twin Emperors of AQ40, Gruul, Max40 Thaddeus and Kel, Lady Vash, and Mag Theron, which I didn't put on this list because half the list is already bosses from vanilla NBC and I wanted some diversity.
What are you saying holy fuck dude for?
Zalgratis is in your chat, man.
Wait, what?
Zalgratis is in your chat.
The Paladin?
Yes.
What? There's no way that's actually him. Do you know that's actually him or what?
I can confirm that's him.
How do you know?
I mean, you can ask S-Fan. S-Fan knows.
Holy fuck, yo. You're a fucking legend, man. Wow, that's amazing. Holy shit, dude, what's up?